everyone, in this video we're going to be covering how to build a basic roguelike world within MapleStory Worlds. We're going to be doing this using a template provided by us, MapleStory Worlds, and so you can just follow along and kind of learn how we built up the sample project. So the core lessons that we're going to cover in this video include configuring your world environment, character selection, player attacks, monster systems, level systems, and data storage. So let's go ahead and click play to kind of get an idea of what we're actually going to see. So here you'll see that we have a title screen where we have the highest score of the world, how to play, which just gives us basic controls, and then we can go ahead and click on start game. Let's go ahead and start with being a mage. And here we can see there is an XP in the center, so you can collect those. There's going to be a level up system here. I'm going to choose to increase my attack power. And then here we can see that we're slowly trying to kind of dodge our enemies and collect the XP that they drop without getting hit. This is a pretty basic example, but this is what we're going to be building throughout the lesson. So the first thing that we're going to cover is kind of how to set up our maps and kind of how to move the player around the map. So the first thing that we're going to do is we see that if you kind of make a new project in MapleStory Worlds, everything is going to be starting with this maple tile mode. This maple tile mode is basically just we have this platform and it's kind of this 2D perspective where we're looking directly at the player. And then in the background, we have this guy here. They're standing on this. We can also add a roof above them. It's a side view kind of gameplay that is in our like classical MapleStory style. But we can actually switch to, as you saw earlier in that demo, something called rectile mode. And this allows us to kind of move up, down, left, and right. So let's go ahead and do that really quick. You have to be actively on the map to switch it, and it will delete all your current developments on your map. So be wary of that before you make the switch. So here I'm going to right click and I'm going to do rectile map. There's also a side view rectile map. You can watch one of the videos to kind of learn more about this, but this is basically going to be similar style to what you see right now, except we can add these custom tiles in. But for now, we're going to do rectile map. And then yes, this is just a warning that it is going to delete everything on our screen. Cool. So now we can see something completely different. So we don't have anything on here right now. So if we try to paint something, that's not going to be possible. Those classic MapleStory tiles are not going to work anymore. We actually have to do something called creating a tile set. So currently we do not have a tile set. So go ahead and here, and this will automatically pop up when you switch the mode to rectile. We're going to go ahead and click create. And then let's do a tile set from a template. You can also create an empty tile set, which I'll show you in just a second. So here we're going to start with the Hennessy's tile set. So let's go ahead and just name this sample for now. And you'll see here, I can go ahead and place grass down. And so now we're in kind of this grassy environment. If I click play, you'll notice we're actually able to move up, down, left, and right, kind of different from your traditional MapleStory projects. So that's going to be what we're using in this main demo. Let's go ahead and show you how to set up the other tiles. Obviously, you can kind of delete them in the same way that you could on the other one. Let's go ahead and open up our tile editor. Let's actually make a tile set from scratch really quick. You can have multiple tile sets, so that's something to keep in mind. Oh, I did not mean to name that. If you name it something different, it's going to delete the old one. So let's name this. It's already kind of given it a name, but I want to call this sample 2. Let's go ahead and configure sample. There we go. So in order to have multiple tile sets in the same map, you're going to have another layer. So we're going to go ahead and open up a second layer, and we're going to make this a different tile set. And so this tile set's going to go on top of that previous one. So you can see here, I don't actually have any tiles in this tile set, so it's going to give me that classic pink missing texture box. Let's go ahead and erase that really quickly. So let's go ahead and actually add some tiles to this tile set. So you can go down here. You can either add them from the workspace image or from the resource storage. There's also this new feature called the Atlas Unpacker. So if you have an Atlas texture like kind of sprite sheet, this would be really helpful for you as well. But we're not going to go into that for this video. Go ahead and go to add resource storage. We have to go to MapleStory Worlds resources. We haven't added any resources to this project. This dirt looks fine for now. So you'll see here, I kind of double clicked that and then it added it into here. If I go back there really quickly just to show you one more time. Let's say I also want to add, where's a clean solid sprite? This one will work. Perfect. So you'll kind of see I double clicked it again and now it's here. So now, this is a trick that I fall into myself quite often. If you have this selected, it's not choosing which tile you're selecting, it's choosing which tile you're editing. I'll show you more about that in a second. So here we can go ahead and see that I can drag tiles all around here. And this is on a separate layer. So if I cover this up and then erase it, you'll still see that same stuff underneath. Now there's a couple key things to keep note here. We can also do something called passability. So if I go back to that edit mode that we talked about before, now we're actually editing properties for each of these tiles. So here we can see the passability option. So now we're no longer editing the sprite itself, but we're editing whether or not the player can travel through it. So here, for example, I'm actually going to turn this off. That's going to be red for not passable. And now if I click play, you'll see if I walk all around here, I can walk all around the current tiles we've placed on the map. And the brown is just the background, that's not a tile. But I can't pass through these tiles, but I can go over, I can go onto this layer, but you will see that I will not be able to pass through this. So that's something to keep in mind. There's a lot more that you can take a look at with our Rectile video currently on the YouTube channel. But for now, this is just kind of a basic introduction to Rectile. So of course, when you change into this Rectile mode, the kind of physics behind the player change as well. So if I go ahead and go to our default player, you'll see here that we have the rigid body component. This is what is used for the classic Maple tile mode, but this is going to be less relevant when we're actually working with the Rectile maps. So we're going to actually hide this. And then you'll see here, we have the kinematic body component. So this is going to change a lot of stuff for our player. Let's go ahead and select our actual player, and let's kind of change some properties on the spot here. So if I go to our kinematic body component, you'll see here, if I move left and right, I'm going to be moving at this base speed of 1. If I turn that up for the X, you'll notice I'll go really fast to the left and right. And you'll see here I can go faster up and down as well. So these are things that may be important for your roguelike. Maybe the level system kind of actually affects your speed. So this would be something that's going to be edited. You'll kind of see that in the code later as well. You can enable jump. So of course, that's just going to make it so you can not jump or jump. We can turn on and off the shadow. We can kind of change more properties about the shadow, like its color and its offset. Pretty straightforward things. You probably won't need to edit these very often, but if you do, they are there. And of course, the size of the shadow. Maybe you want this to change as you are jumping. You kind of see it does that by default, but you may want to do this for other things as well. Additionally, we have tile collision. So obviously, do you actually run and interact with the different tiles? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. You can turn that on and off, and you'll see we can run straight through there. And then acceleration is depreciated, so do not worry about that anymore. We also have something called jump speed. So this is going to be how high you can jump. And then our jump drag, and this is just going to be how fast you fall back down. So of course, this also decreases the height of the jump too. Awesome. And that'll be kind of everything for the building the map section of this video. Of course, I recommend that if you have any other questions to kind of check out our other videos on the topic. But now to move into the next section where we're going to be talking about the character select screen. So now that we've kind of showed you how to build out your map in MapleStory Worlds, the next thing I want to show you is how to build this character selection screen. Now, we're not going to build it exactly like the sample project does, but then we'll go in and kind of look at exactly what we showed how to do, and then show exactly how it looks like in the sample project, and maybe how to tweak a few things. So let's go ahead and start by kind of covering how to set up UI. So we're going to kind of replicate what they did. We're going to go ahead and go to our UI editor. You need to go to this to kind of edit all of our UI within MapleStory Worlds. So make sure if you're not seeing UI pop up, this is probably the reason why. Now you'll see down here, we have this kind of thing called UI groups. It kind of looks very similar to the map layers, and for a good reason. A very similar concept. We have 3 different layers here. We have a default group. We have this pop-up group. So for example, there's going to be a pop-up that shows, and then we have this toast group, which is actually going to contain like these different pop-up messages at the top. So that kind of gives you an idea of what we're going to see with the UI. So here you see that message at the top, here you see this pop-up, and here you see this default group. Of course, you can add as many groups as you want. These are just kind of example groups that MapleStory Worlds provides to you, but you don't have to follow this kind of formatting at all. I can create my own group, and we could even call this the character selection group. So perfect. Now that we have our character selection group, let's go ahead and start making our character selection screen. So there are multiple ways to kind of start adding UI. There's a couple of different options here. At the end of this day, this is kind of the same as just right-clicking here and then create child entity. We can choose a UI empty. This is going to be the one that you use a lot of the time. This just adds nothing, and then you can kind of add your components as needed. UI sprite, this is going to just add a sprite button. A scroll view, which is going to be really, really important for this, text, and then input text. And you might be asking what the difference between input text and text is. Input text is for allowing the user to actually type in that text box. But for now, I want to go ahead and make the background. So what we're going to do is add a UI sprite. And here we have this big, large white box. I kind of want to make this semi-transparent. If you go to the image RUID, you'll see here in just like a default project, there's actually some things that we can kind of use here. I think I'm going to use this button gray effect. It's kind of almost invisible right now, but if I click off, you'll notice that it's this kind of big gray box. Unfortunately for us, the gray dimming kind of makes it look like it's not there, but rest assured it is there. And now that we have that, I want to add some other properties. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this though, just so we keep track of everything. We're going to call this our character panel. And then if I right click on that, and then I click, the next thing we're going to do is a scroll view component. And then I'm going to just fill this in pretty closely to match the box size that we have. All right, so now let's talk about what the scroll layout group component actually does. You'll notice here that there's this kind of this white box in this top left corner. You'll see here, that's that scroll image here. So what a scroll layout group does is it kind of arranges different items into a specific either grid or horizontal or vertical format. So right now here we have this one scroll image, and it should be very obvious what is happening as I start adding these boxes. It's going to automatically position them to kind of lay them out in a convenient manner. And you'll notice that it automatically went to the next line as well. So here, let's get rid of some of those. We don't need all of this right now. If I go to the scroll layout group, you'll notice we have a bunch of different settings here. So we have the alignment, so we can change them. Okay, it's going to start from the middle center. It can start from the lower left. It can start from the lower right. Pretty much anything you can imagine. Let's keep upper center for now, since I think that makes a lot of sense. You can also change the direction of the scroll bar. So does it go left to right or bottom to top or vice versa? You'll see a lot of different settings here about the padding. So you'll see here, oh, that's not going to be very obvious. So if I add top padding, you're going to notice here that it actually, oh wait, I'm not actually editing the left padding right now, but you'll see here that it's adding some space to the left before we get to these individual items. And then if I add some padding to the right, it is doing the same thing. And you'll actually see our scroll bar popped up here. We can actually scroll to the right now. But let's keep these all at 10. I think that's a fairly good number for now. We'll go ahead and keep all those as is. And then our grid spacing is going to be the actual space between the individual items here. So that can kind of give you an idea of what we're actually looking at with this scroll layout group component. We can actually see here there are a couple more settings that we have. So if I go ahead and remove this really quickly. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I just noticed that we had a D typed in here, so some settings were getting cut out. But if we go back to here, we'll notice a couple of other things. Really important, the cell size. So here we can have 200 by 200, and this is going to make the icons a lot larger in the project. You'll notice here that we have the start corner. We already talked about the grid child alignment. We already talked about the start axis, so we can start it going vertical versus horizontal. We can kind of have a fixed row count and then make it adapt around that. So let's say if I want a fixed 5x5 grid and you have to scroll between those, you can do that. You can auto hide the scroll bar. So if there's not enough items, it won't even pop up. You can have it set to always show, or you can make it so the scroll bar never shows up as well. Now we've kind of looked at all these settings, but there's also two different modes we can have for the scroll layout group. We can have vertical. So let me kind of delete some of these really quickly. And then we'll kind of add some more spacing again. So let's delete some of these. We don't need all of those right now. And then let's add some spacing. You'll see here now that they're pretty much purely vertical. This is kind of similar to having the grid layout and having just one, but a little bit more straightforward. And then you can also see we can change it to horizontal, which hint seems the most appropriate for what we're building at the moment. So we're going to keep it to this horizontal setting. And let's add some spacing. And then we can actually go ahead and delete these. We'll probably want 3. So let's go ahead and make it what we think it would look like. So let's do middle center. And then we probably want our items to be just a little bit more spaced out. Again, it doesn't really matter. You kind of are going to customize this to your own liking. So we're going to go ahead and make these slightly larger. So let's go ahead and do that. So here, I've made this bigger. Let's go ahead and actually delete these two. I think this seems like an appropriate size. There we go. So now we have our first character. And let's go ahead and work this, and then we'll copy it 2 more times before we finish our character selection. So let's go ahead and add another background onto here. So for our image RUID, I'm going to set up, let's see how this looks. I think it should be a bit less transparent. Maybe we go with none for now. And let's just set the color to be kind of a darker color, but a little bit more transparent. It doesn't have to look perfect for now. We're just trying to get the idea of things. Let's make it about 75%. Yeah, that should be perfect for now. So here we have our image, and we'll call this our character. There we go. Perfect. So now let's go ahead and add a few more things. Let's go ahead and add our image. So within our actual character, we're going to add a UI sprite, and this could be like the icon of the character. So let's go ahead and throw this in there. And then let's set the image RUID. This can be like a sword for now. And then we can add a couple more. Let's call this the icon. We can add another one, UI text. Let's make this white. Of course, there's a lot more properties here. We can change the font size, and as the release of this video, you will also be able to change the font of the text now. You can also edit a few more things. Let's go ahead and make it bold. I think that makes sense for the character. It's already middle center. We'll call this, it's probably going to be a little bit smaller because the character name might get large. Let's call this our warrior. Awesome. And then I'm just going to align this to the center the best of my ability. So let's go ahead and set the X to 0. Again, if you've never seen anchor presets before, this might be a new concept to you, but here we're currently anchored to the middle. So X being 0 is in the middle, and then Y being 0 is also in the middle. But we could also change it to this, which means this left X is 0, or here, this top left corner is X equals 0 and Y equals 0. And you can kind of get an idea of what's going to be going on there. And then we also have these scalable options. So if you want to have something automatically scale to the size of it, here it'll scale to both the X and Y, stay on the left and then scale up and down. Here it's going to stay in the middle and scale up and down. And then you can kind of go all the way across the different corners. But for now, we're going to keep this middle preset. We want X to be equal to 0, and then probably Y just like somewhere up here. There might be a couple of other things here, like maybe we have a character description or something else of the sort. But again, that's going to just be text. We can go ahead and add it just like how we added this warrior. But you know what, let's go ahead and just do it. Just to get an idea of things, let's go ahead, set the font color to white. We're going to stretch this box out. This one, we're going to want things to be top left corner. And then we'll just say something like a description about a warrior class in a roguelike game. Perfect. But there's one key thing that we might be missing here that we haven't thought about yet. Well, we have the UI, but the character isn't able to interact with anything yet. We just kind of have this blank slate here that's just not hooked up to anything. So Before we get into the code, we're going to go ahead and add this button. We're actually not going to add a button to the thing. We could do it that way, but I actually want to make this whole thing a button. So I want to make this character button. So we're going to go here and add a button component. So just like how we kind of made things through here, we can also just add the properties directly onto something. I'm going to basically make the whole thing a button component. You'll see here, there's going to be some color tint. So it's actually going to react to when you click on it in game. And then key code. There's a bunch of different settings here. You can read the documentation to kind of get a better idea of what's going on here, but just some key things like the color of when it's pressed, the color when it's normal, and the selected color. Let's go ahead and show you what that looks like in game. So here for the individual groups, we also have some settings to mess around with. A default show just means it's going to show as soon as you start the game. Let's go ahead and turn that on really quickly. So you can kind of see here our UI is available. We actually need to go ahead. Let's go ahead and throw in a couple more of our characters really quick. Go back into the UI editor. Throw on 2 more. And it seems like they kind of fit in there pretty perfectly already. So that is perfect. Let's go ahead and tweak a few more things. Maybe we want some drop shadow on there. So let's go ahead and add some. It should just be right here. Let's go ahead and turn that on. That's something I always like to add just to give something the feeling of depth, but it's not completely necessary. Go ahead and add that. We'll make it pretty transparent. I like to make the angle a little bit more cornered. I think 45 sounds good. So it's that perfect angle. And then we kind of got the start of something. Now we actually need to go into the code and see how these are going to be tweaked. But for that, we're going to go back into the sample project. So now that we're back into our roguelike demo project, let's go ahead and take a look at the example they made and see how it kind of compares to ours. So here we'll kind of see they did the same thing. We have that slot layout and then we have that select character frame. Very similar to what I just showed you, but you'll notice that there's actually nothing in there right now. So something that we do a lot with kind of setting up our UI in games is we'll actually make certain components a model. So here, if we go into our models folder, it's all neatly organized for us. And then we go into the select character slot model. You'll see that that kind of text example we made is actually turned into a model. And if you haven't done this before, I'll go back to the scene really quickly. You can create almost everything as a model. So if I were to just go ahead and right click this and then create model from entity, you would see it show up here. So that's kind of how we did it. And then they just kind of deleted it from the actual UI that we see here. So they created it as this model. And you'll see it has very similar things here. We got the name, the icon, all the same things here. And the reason that we do that is because we want to actually be able to add these different characters in dynamically. So as you're editing your game, you may want to add new classes later on eventually, new weapons, or whatever it is that's going to show up in the UI. You're going to want to throw that in dynamically. So what this does, it actually creates during runtime from this template, it's going to create it and then it's going to edit all the different properties of it and then it's going to throw it in there. And now you may ask, well, how is our game knowing what characters to create? And now we're going to start to dig into our code for our character selection screen here. So here you will see our character data. We're going to have a character ID, some different stats that you can set up. We'll kind of talk about the weapons and stuff in a bit. You can have the character select. So this is going to have more information. So when it's setting it up, it's actually going to load from these different data sets. Things like from the ID, it's going to load the image, the character's name. These are actually name IDs. So these are actually localized. So it'll actually load from either Korean or English. So it's going to use those keys like UI assassin and turn it into assassin and stuff like that. These things may be hard to follow at first, but I swear if you look at the code, it will not be too difficult. So here we have the character data, and then we also have that character select data. So like I get set again, these are these different IDs. So here we have that UI warrior, and that would go into here. If we went to UI warrior, we'd see the different translations for that. So these are just the data sets, but now where in code is it actually doing that? So let's go into our script folder. We have a bunch of different stuff for UI. The one that we're going to be looking at is the select character UI controller and the select character slot controller. Let's look at the select character UI first. We have this kind of couple default functions here. So these are basically just going to turn the character on or off. Here we will see this one is just going to kind of populate the data here. So if I do init character slot data, it's going to select the character ID here and then select the image RUID here, and it's going to kind of assign all those different properties. But let's go into where it is actually loading the data from. So this is actually setting up the data, but it's going to be loaded up from our character select data logic. So on begin play, it's going to be running this character select data function. And then from here, it's loading from the data set. We have a whole bunch of documentation on loading from data sets. You can go ahead and search data sets within our MapleStory Worlds documentation, and you'll get a ton of resources on how to set something like this up. But for now, we're just going to show you how to do it in this example project. And that should be everything you need to know for the character selection screen. So next, we're going to be moving into our player attack. So now let's do a deep dive into kind of how the combat works on this specific project. Like we've kind of seen from the sample, the first thing you're going to do is select that character. And then if we go to their character data, you'll remember that the character weapons are going to be actually assigned. So we picked a mage in that little introduction sequence. And so that had the thunder weapon. But if you selected a warrior, you would have the sword. And if you selected the assassin, you would have the star weapon. The reason that we put this in a data set is actually very important. If you're going to be doing a lot of balancing on your game, it's very, very helpful to have all of this information in a data set where we can easily modify it at all times. Rather than if you were just to put it straight into the code, it could be kind of daunting to go back in there and manually assign things like damage, defense, and other stats like that. So we'll go ahead and go into our weapons now. So here you'll see we have our dart weapon. There's a bit of logic behind this, so it's going to add this. Well, actually, let's go ahead and take a look at the models first. Every time you select your character, it's actually going to add this model. So here we have our different models for our different things. You can actually see the sword right now because it's not playing its animation, but just trust that there is a sword in the background there. Then we see here, this has the weapon sword component, the one that I just had the script open for, like the dart one. And then you'll see here that this model has that weapon dart. This model has that weapon thunder. The first thing that they're going to do is actually initialize data from our tables. So we also have a weapon data table. Here we have our attack value, our cooldown time for the weapon, so how fast that weapon is triggering, our projectile move speed. This is obviously going to be only relevant for our dart weapon because that's actually going to shoot out a dart. And then just, our model ID. This is going to be so our game knows where to actually find the model. Really quickly, let's take a look at how this data is actually loading into our project. So we can go ahead and see here in our weapon data logic that we have a couple of different functions here. We have just a table that's going to hold our weapon data, and this is just a generic property of part of the script. And then we have our onBeginPlay, which is going to call this init weapon data. And here in this function, you'll see that we are using the data service. We're actually getting that table from the weapon data, the stuff that we just looked at. And then we can see here, we're just kind of going through the different rows. We're initializing a weapon data type. So if you search weapon, search into our weapon data type, you'll actually see here there's a type with several different properties, and this is just what we're using as a kind of formula for our weapon data. And here we're just kind of initializing all of that based off of what we saw in our data table. Let's go ahead and go to our weapon sword. I'm not going to go over every single one of these. I recommend you kind of just read through them to kind of get an idea of how each one functions. But here, if we go to the on update, you'll see it is setting up a timer. This is just a very transparent way to see. So it's using a cooldown timer, and then it is going to see if it can attack. It's going to request an attack. If it is able to attack, we're going to go ahead and set that timer to 0. Actually, we're just going to do it regardless whether the attack fails or not. And then if not, we're just going to add to that timer to see if we can attack again in the future. So this is just going to run in the background. Another way of doing this that I actually recommend and want you guys to take a look at is using the timer service, which basically just builds this loop for you. But this is just a very easy way to see and kind of understand what's going on behind the scenes. So we have this little loop that's attacking. So let's go ahead and take a look at that request attack function. First, let's figure out what direction the player is facing, because that's the direction that we want to attack in. And then we're getting a trigger. So attached to the model is going to be a trigger box. So this is going to be like our hitbox, like how big our, if you like played a fighting game or something like that, you might be familiar with the term hitbox. That's going to be the box. If that enemy is within that box, they are going to take damage. So first we're going to use that hitbox. We're just making sure that we have a hitbox at all. And then we're going to get things like the box size, the offset, and stuff like that. And then the world position of the entity. And this is just all a bunch of math that you can take a look at to kind of understand how we're calculating that. And then we're going to see if the attack hits. And then you'll see here, once we do hit, we're going to kind of play that sound. Actually, this is going to happen either way. This is just going to be playing the animation and the attack. Here, it's using the effects service to actually play the attack animation. And then here is where we're actually going to be checking if the collision service is actually registering if there's any enemies in there. And if so, get the enemies. There might be multiple enemies as well. And then we're going to use the damage calc help, which is another function we'll take a look at in a bit. And then we'll also go ahead and throw in the weapon data of the attack value. And you'll see that we have a level up system as well. So that attack will also increase over time throughout the course of our roguelike demo. But that is the general idea. And all of these other weapons are going to follow kind of a similar line of functionality. So for the dart, it's a little bit different because it sends out these different dart components. And then these dart components are actually going to be what is dealing the damage, but they all work in a similar functionality. This thunder is going to target a random enemy within your range, and it's going to strike down and also have a similar kind of hitbox thing going on. And that's going to be running off of a similar cooldown timer, which again, we can find and edit in our dataset. So that's kind of how you can tweak this project. If you were building something from scratch, I really recommend that you kind of do a look through, see how things are all tied in together and follow accordingly. Another thing I might recommend is it's not set up this way in this project, but another thing I might do as well is you can actually do something called inheritance. If you aren't familiar with inheritance, you could have a base weapon class, and then you could actually have your different weapons pull from the weapon base parent class. And that way, for example, we have like this on update function, which performs this kind of timer thing that can kind of be reused between the sword and the dart. They all kind of use this timer for attack speed. So that's something that we could kind of reuse and use inheritance for. So that's a topic that I recommend looking up before you build a project like this, because it would be very useful. That's everything that I want to cover for the actual combat, but let's go ahead and click play, and we're going to go ahead and kind of learn about the different things that we talked about throughout this combat. So let's go ahead and select the warrior this time. We'll see here that we can see it's changed based off our movement direction like we talked about. And if they're in that hitbox range, they take damage quite slowly. I think we might need a rebalance, but eventually they will die. This will apply to any enemies within that hitbox. So that's kind of how we implement the combat. Let's move on to the monsters, because there's actually more we need to do for the monsters to take damage and kind of how the monsters are going to target the player. So now let's go ahead and talk about how to set up monsters within our project. For starters, let's go ahead and take a look at our monsters. So we have two different monsters in this project. We can see them both as those models, or if you're familiar with Unity, they're very similar to prefabs. We'll see here we have the monster snail. So here we have our blue snail here. We have a couple different components. Of course, we have like a sprite renderer component. There's some other key components like the state component. This is going to manage like if it's walking, running, and playing animations alongside those. We have some documentation on that you can read as well. The main thing that we're going to be taking a look at here is we have this AI chase component here. This is really useful if you just need something that like you can drag and drop to work very easily. So it is chasing your player and like a detection range and all of this stuff that you can kind of just use by default. So here we have it set up so it has a detection range of 10. For this project, the enemies are always going to be chasing you, so we just have this set pretty high, so it's almost always chasing the player. There's different types of authorities, like is this going to be updating on the client or the server? This is a single player game, so we're just going to have it update on the client. If you do want it on the server, if you're worried the player might try to cheat in the game, if that is something that you are worried about for your project, it might be best to have this set to server. But we can go ahead and see here, it's got a movement component, which also means it kind of moves similarly to a player. Like it's got a speed factor, which will determine how fast it moves up and down, left and right. And like we kind of talked about, this is like the main component for Rectile that you need to be worrying about. It has a trigger component. We have the hitbox for like the radius at which like the player can actually hit things. But we also need to determine how big the hitbox for the snail is as well. So we can determine if we've actually hit the snail. So you'll see here we can actually edit this collider. Let me go back into that thing here. It's actually giving us a little bit of trouble right now. But if this was not a model right now, you would actually be able to edit the size of the collider just by clicking this, and you would see a green box pop up, which you can drag. You'll see similar stuff in the adventure video that we have also released already. But you can also manually change the size. All of this collider edit does is manually lets you drag and drop, but that would be like just the same things as this box size and this collider offset, which just means how far is it from the center. Maybe if you have like a weird setup sprite, maybe you want the hitbox to be up here, but the enemy is in the center here. And then we also have the monster controller. So here, if I go ahead and go to this monster controller component, you'll see here we have all of these different settings about actually spawning the monster. On update, like, is it going to be moving? So if the game is running, the movement component is going to be on. It's going to be chasing that player. It needs to know when to spawn the different monsters. It has some of that default initialization. Also, again, if we go back to our data tables, you'll see again, there is more data for the monsters where we can edit the starting HP of the monsters, the move speed, the attack value, and the attack cooldown. And back in here, it's actually going to be pulling that from the monster data type up here. So we actually can see this custom type that we made. So if we go down to our type section, you'll see we have the monster data type. And then this is just basically like a collection of different properties, like the ID, the model, the start HP, the attack value, the cooldown, and move speed. So here, if we actually go to the monster data logic, you'll see that we're initializing that table the same way we initialize the weapon data. So here we're just saying on begin play, we're going to initialize that monster data. We have a table for the monster data as well whenever we want to access that. Here, we're going kind of through that table. So here, a data service get table monster data, and that is that table that we looked at before. And here, we're just going through, we're getting the model ID, we're getting the start HP, we're getting the attack value, the cooldown time, the monster speed, and just all the different properties that are, again, a part of that monster type as well. Let's go back to that monster controller. If I go down to the get damage, this is going to calculate basically like when it takes damage, this damage value is going to subtract from its HP. If it is less than HP, this is basically the logic for the death of the monster. It's going to go to the game logic script. It's going to count that kill score. So again, if you're ever curious, you can kind of follow the train of thought here. So we're not going to look at the timer service. We're going to look at that game logic. So if we go to our folder with the game logic, and then here in this game logic is where we're going to be handling this count kill score function, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, especially with our data storage section. So now that we've kind of talked about how monsters work in our project, let's go ahead and look at how monsters spawn in our project. As a part of this monster spawn pool entity, which is going to manage all of the spawning of the different monsters, and our spawn position group, which is going to manage or really just act as a collection of all the different positions at which our monsters are going to spawn into. You'll see here, if I go to the scene really quick, it's just kind of wrapping around the center of the player's spawn. So these are going to act as our different spawn positions. But the main thing that we want to take a look at here is this monster spawn pool, which has the script, also named monster spawn pool, that is going to manage the spawning of our monsters. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So the main kind of kickoff for our spawning is going to be at the very bottom here in our handle entity map changed event. So basically what we're saying is, okay, well, when we switch to the map that is the in-game map, so this is just going to be whenever you click play on the project, it's going to bring you into this map. Here we're going to do a couple different things. We're going to initialize the spawn positions. So we go up to here. We're going to see that we're basically going to that monster spawn position group entity. We're going to go through all of its different children. So you'll see these are all of its children. And we're going to go ahead and assign these to a table just so we can keep track of them a little bit easier. And then next up, you'll see this initialize monster data function. So if you go here, you'll see that this is next up on the list. And in this function, we're going to go ahead and check whatever the current monster is. So by the start of the project, the current monster is going to be this snail monster. And we're going to go ahead and see if we have the data for that. If not, we're just going to go ahead and get it. And then we're going to go ahead and set the monster spawn list count to be 1, because at the start of the round, we're going to only have one monster type spawning. That'll later change throughout the course of our spawning process. So here, we're going to reset the monster spawn pool as well. We're going to talk about what a spawn pool is in just a moment, but for now, just know that we're resetting it so everything's back in its kind of default position before we get started. And then here, finally, we've kind of gone through all the setup. Now we're actually going to start spawning monsters. So here we're setting the timer service, which is just going to set up this kind of loop for us. And we're setting a repeating function. So every 5 seconds, we're going to call this spawn monster function. I would recommend actually maybe making this another property that you can change at will, maybe right here. But just so we can see it very plain and clearly, we just have it set to 5 here. Now let's scroll up and let's take a look at our spawn monster function, which is really the meat of this project here. So here, we're gonna go ahead and get a monster list. So what we're just basically checking through right now is in this monster entity table, this is a property that we have set up as a part of this script. And this is a table itself. And this is a table keeping track of other tables, in which case we're keeping a track of a table for each different monster. And this is just the collection of those tables. So right now we want to say, hey, fetch me that table that is for this monster. So all of the monsters that are this monster type, give me a list of all of those monsters. And then here we're checking, okay, is there even a list for that monster yet? If not, we're going to go ahead and expand our monster pool, which is just basically making another monster list for that different monster type. And then we're going to go ahead and then get that monster list here. So we can go ahead and look at the expand monster pool really quickly. So again, this is just going ahead and saying, hey, do we have a table set up for this monster yet? If not, let's go ahead and set up all the default information we need to get that ready. And you can go ahead and take a look step by step of what we're doing for each individual property, but we're just going to go ahead and get the general idea for now. So now that we've gotten our monster list, we're going to go ahead and check through that monster list. So what we're doing here is we're going through and we're making another table called available monsters. Whenever we have a monster die in our project, we don't necessarily want to destroy that monster. It's kind of a waste of resources to keep destroying a monster, creating a monster, destroying a monster, creating a monster. So what we're actually doing when a monster dies, that monster is going to be thrown aside temporarily. And then we want to reuse that monster. We'll just reset its HP, put it back in the field later when we need to spawn a new monster. That way we're just kind of creating and destroying less, which is really useful for performance reasons. So here we're going ahead and checking, okay, what monsters are dead, or I guess in another sense, available for us to reuse. So we're going ahead and doing that. And then if there are no monsters available, we're going ahead and creating a new monster. Here we're checking the spawn position. We're just making sure, okay, let's try to see what positions we can spawn the monsters at. So here we're going ahead and checking, okay, the number of spawn positions that we have. And then we're going to go ahead and see how many monsters we have available to spawn. And if so, go through and just kind of spawn all of those different monsters. And then we go ahead and we want to switch to the next monster. So this update next monster function is basically saying, okay, now that we spawned the first monster, I want to go ahead and actually select the next monster to start spawning. So here we go to update next monster. And this is just going through a list that we have at the top and then iterating through that. So we first did the snail, so now we're going to go to that monster slime. And then so you'll kind of see that here. And then if we've finished going through the entire list, we're actually going ahead and starting back to the start of the list here. So we're just kind of iterating through and we're spawning the first monster, then the second monster, then the third monster, and then back to the first monster. And that's everything for the spawning of the monsters. Again, it's kind of a lot and the pulling system can be kind of confusing. So I recommend you just kind of go step by step and kind of take a look at it yourself. And that will be everything for our monster section. So next, let's talk about our leveling system. The next thing that we're going to talk about is going to be our leveling up system. So as you'll see here, we have a UI menu set up to be very similar to our character selection screen. We'll have these 3 different level ups pop up. This one's a little bit more static. You'll see it's not using a scroll view. It's actually just got these 3 kind of hard position power-ups. But these will be assigned to random power-ups. So of course, in order to get our power-ups in our little sample roguelike, you will need to get XP. The amount of XP you need is going to be again configured with a dataset. This one could be debatable whether or not you want to use a dataset for this. Another really good way of doing this would be something, for example, like an exponential function that says, hey, maybe to start you need 30 XP, and then for the next level it's going to be 1.5 times that, which is going to be 60, and then 1.5 times that, which is going to be, actually it would be times 2, so 30 times 2 is 60, and then maybe times 2 is 120. This is just adding 30 every time. This could be done with a function, but this is just kind of showing you one way of doing things. This way you would have to hard code all of your levels and the XP needed, which is good, but it's honestly up to you and what you feel like is right for your project. So let's go ahead and take a look at our level up logic. So here you will see, this is where it's actually going to be loading from those data sets. So on begin play, it's going to be doing these 2 functions. So the level up data and then the enhanced data. So these are actually, if we go to our enhanced data, these are actually the different upgrades that we can get. So the value, what the name is. So here, maybe if you're upgrading your movement speed, how much it's going to upgrade, and the icon for the different upgrades as well. So if we go back to our level up logic, so it's initializing both of those data tables. And then here, once we need to actually get our different data sets, it's going to be just pulling all of them and then selecting a random 3 of those. But it needs to make sure it's getting 3 unique ones as well. So you can kind of take a look at the algorithm that is being used to do that here. And then how do we actually get XP so that these power-ups are popping up in the first place? Well, we have on the player a player EXP collider controller. So this is just basically saying, hey, we have this handle trigger event function here, which is just going to be saying, hey, whenever XP enters, if it is XP, add that XP value. And then we also have things like the range of our magnet. The magnet is basically just saying how close do we need to be to that XP before our player picks it up. And then if we go down just a little bit further, we actually have controls for the EXP item itself. This is actually using what we call an object pool component. So these monsters and EXP items are actually being pooled. If you don't know what a pooling system is, basically the idea is that we have maybe 5 to 10 objects, and I'll go ahead and show you. Let's go back to our scene view really quickly. We might need to go here and let's turn off our UI because we're not looking at that. Maybe if we go to our game, let's load that up really quickly. You'll see here that we might have these different monsters and they're all loaded in. These are actually the spawn positions, but let's just pretend these are monsters. They would all be loaded in, and then it is going to actually teleport it there instead of creating a new object every time. And then once the enemy is dead, it's going to be maybe put it back all the way over here and reset all of its stats, and then it'll teleport it back over here when we need it. And it does the same with XP. Once we pick it up, it might teleport back here. Creating and destroying objects can be very expensive code-wise, so maybe that's why we use this pooling system. You don't have to use a pooling system in your own project, but for the sample project we did. I do recommend trying that out because it does help performance a lot. So let's go over back to our player XP. So again, yeah, just if you're within the range, it is going to be triggering. And then we go to our item controller. It's being pulled. We also have the amount of XP it's going to add. And then we want to check our player stat controller. So here we can see add EXP value. So basically whenever we pick up one of these things, it's going to add XP to our player. And then we also have a function here that is basically just adding the player XP collider based off of the different settings that we have enabled in the data sets. Enhancing the player, this is going to actually set up what it is we are changing. So if the target property name equals max HP, well, we want to add max HP. If we want to add speed to the player, we are going to add speed to the player. And that should be everything for our XP system. It's pretty straightforward. We have these pellets. If they enter your magnet range, you're going to pick them up, and then they will use the pooling system to be teleported outside. And then as you reach a high enough level, we're going to spawn that UI that you see to select stats. And then based off of the different data set properties we have, it's going to change the value. So here, again, you'll see that we did the input speed is changed there. Here we have a function to edit the magnet range. So if we were to follow the player EXP collider, we would see that function we talked about with the magnet range. And then here we have that max HP. And then the damage one is actually handled a little bit differently. That one is actually going to be handled here. It doesn't have to actually update anything until it is attacking again. So that'll be handled in a later section. It all seems like a lot, but again, take your time, see how things are connected, tweak them to how you want, and it shouldn't be too big of a deal. Something to keep in note is that if you do decide to go through with this, you will want to add a lot more levels because currently you only have 5 levels. You may need to do balancing changes because currently in the sample project, it's fairly difficult to kill enemies. So again, try to tweak that and make it feel how you would like it. Finally, the last topic that we want to talk about in this video is covering data storage. So in this project, all we're really saving is what your best score has been. So throughout the project, and you'll see through the game logic, we will have a score that we're keeping track of how many kills you got in one run, and then it wants to save the highest that you've ever gotten. So here we have a couple different functions to actually save that data so that once you close out of the game and you reopen it, you'll actually be able to see your previous high score. It'll actually save, and all of this data storage is handled by our platform, MapleStory Worlds. You do not need to store this on any separate server. All of that data is easily savable and manageable within MapleStory Worlds. So here we're going to actually be getting the best score. So here we have the get user data storage. There are multiple different types of data storage within MapleStory Worlds. There's one that's like per world, one that's per creator. This one is per player on your game, which is going to be the one that you're probably using the most often. Like maybe you need to save the amount of money the player has or something similar of the sort. So here we're going to go ahead and get the data storage. Here we're just using the key of the user ID. If you're not familiar with user ID, every player is going to have one, and that's going to be something that you're going to want to keep track of a ton when you're building games on the platform. This user ID for now is just going to be used to pull the correct data storage. And then we'll see here, if the data storage equals nil, maybe it hasn't been initialized yet. This is something that can happen often. If you've not created the data storage for the player yet, it's a good practice to kind of have something set up like this. So if the player has never played the game before, it's basically saying their best kill score is going to be 0. If we get an error while loading data storage, this can also happen sometimes. We will also set it to 0. This is not going to reset their score. This is basically just saying we failed to load it. Let's set it to 0 for now. It's not going to actually change anything. If the error code equals 0, which means there was no error at all, we're going to be pulling this. And then because it's probably being saved as a string, we're going to convert that into a number really quick and then have our score transferred. Okay, we figured out how to pool our best score from the platform, but how do we actually save that in the first place? So even more straightforward. First, we have to get that user ID, and here you can actually see how we pulled that user ID. So you can do the user service, .local player, and then .player component, .user ID. If you're doing like a single player game, this will almost always just be the person playing your game, but this is just basically the client-sided person. And then the client is going to send a request to the server to try to save it. Again, you can only do data storage on the server, so that's why we're first checking on the client and then we're sending it to the server. Because we haven't really talked about it too much in this video. If you are curious to learn more about client and server communication, we have a video on that as well that we really recommend you check out. That can be very, very tricky, so please take a look. But if you're building a single player game, this might be all the knowledge you need to know. So here we have the self.bestKillScore equals kill score. So here we're just kind of setting our best kill score up there. And then we are getting the data storage. Again, we're just kind of pulling that data storage. The best way to say it is this data storage object lets us save and get, and we're just trying to assign this to a local variable so we can use it. Now we're using the set and wait function on that data storage instead of the get and wait. So now we're doing set and wait. We're using this key best score. So you'll see we actually pulled from this key best score. So like, even though that we are using the data storage based on user ID, the user might have multiple things that they need to save and get from. So here we're talking about the score. So that key is the best score. Maybe if this is money, you would use the key gil. There's a bunch of different things that you could use for the key. The key just has to be a string. Here, we're setting that best score, and then we're doing toString because it's best to save things as a string. Or if you're doing like a table, you would want to JSONify that string, which you can, again, take a look at our documentation on saving data, and that'll help a lot for whatever you want to work on. Here, this onSync property is basically saying, hey, whenever this value, the synced value gets updated, this is going to trigger. And this is just so we can update the actual UI. So once we've loaded the data or saved the data, it's just going to update the UI on our game. And then again, just on begin play, we are just going ahead and requesting that kill score. If you want to look at how that kill score is managed, you can take a look at that game logic function we looked at. But for now, we're just focusing on the data storage. And that'll be everything that we're going to cover for the video on this project. If you have any questions about the project or anything you want tips on how to work with the project, please feel free to leave a comment and we will try to get to you and to help you as soon as possible. Thank you all for watching this video, and I hope you guys can create some awesome things in MapleStory worlds.